My dear viewer students, let us have further discussion on the same poem, God Moves in a Mysterious Way by William Cowper. So, in this session, we shall have how to analyze this poem by taking certain images and certain points, certain issues, and certain poetic elements out of that poem, and how this poem leads us to analyze different concepts in this poem. In the earlier session, we discussed the poet and we discussed the text of the poem. While we discussed the poet, how the poet was in depression and he had the suicidal thoughts, and how he came out of that critical condition by submitting himself to the God, by surrendering himself to the God, and that made him to believe in the existence of God so firmly. In the earlier session, we discussed about the wonders performed by the God, and we also discussed what kind of treasures the God, the Creator, has preserved amidst the nature or in the depth of the earth, and how God's will is sovereign, how God's will is unquestionable, how God's will is supreme, that nobody can go against it. And in other way, I discussed this God's will, sovereign will, is also a law of nature, and how God is fearful, horrible, terrible, as well he is merciful at the same time, and how God looks frowning and smiling. He becomes angry, at the same time he smiles at us, and it is our duty to see the revelation of his purposes, why he remains so to all the living beings in this world. And according to the poet, he says atheism is a blunder, mistake. Don't be atheists. Don't be theists. Be atheists. Be pantheists. Don't be theists, he says. Then to don't be atheists. Don't be atheists, but be theists. And don't go to test him, because it is all in vain. It is impossible to examine the God, because God himself is only the interpreter of himself. Nobody else can interpret the God. Here in this session, in this discussion, what objectives we have, with what intention we are going to have this discussion. The intention is to make you people to know how to elaborate the theme of the poem into a long essay type answer, or into a short note by taking some sub concepts that are discussed in this poem. And other type of question is to annotate the lines, and how to annotate, and how to identify the lines, and how to elaborate that annotation, and what kind of points you will have to cover in one annotation. This is another important important objective with which we are going to have a discussion on the poem. Now let me discuss three important concepts here. One is different forms of God that are to be discussed, different forms of God that we find in this poem. So this is one concept. And another concept is the relationship between the God and the living beings in this world. The relationship between the God and the living beings in this world. And the third one, the similarity between the concept of God in Indian religious practice. See, similarity between the concept of God in Indian religious practice and William Cowper's concept of God. So how there is a greater similarity between the concept of God that is presented here in this poem by William Cowper and that concept of God we practice in Indian religion. Okay, in Indian theological belief, we do have God, what is God and how is God and how we believe that God exists. So this similarity is there, and let us discuss that. See, William Cowper's this poem God Moves in a Mysterious Way, as I said, was first published with one title, Light Shining Out of Darkness, in 1773, and later that title happened to be changed. Here, while we begin to read this poem, we'll see the different forms of God. The different forms of God we see in this poem are, see, the first one, he performs the wonders. He is so mysterious. He performs wonders, and such a wonderful entity is the God that he can plant his footsteps on the sea. It means God is there in the sea. On the surface of the water, he steps forward, he walks. So God is there in water. Means it is one form of God. And God is there in the storm. God is there in the air. It is another form of God. See, in Christianity, actually, it is not an acceptable one. That too, in Catholic Christianity, it is not acceptable. They believe only in one God, that is Jesus, who is the representative of the supreme power, and he has been sent to this world as a savior of the human world, and that's why we have to worship only Jesus. He is our savior, he is the representative of the God, but nobody else or nothing else shall be accepted as God. As well in other religions also, God cannot be in different forms. God cannot be in multiple forms. It should be only in a single form. This is even in Islam also it is believed. But in Hinduism we believe that God is in various forms. Deva Nobba, Nama, Halavu. There are so many names, and according to those names there are so many forms. But in Christianity, if somebody believes in the different forms of God, that too in different forms of the elements of nature, that such believer will not be called a Christian, he will be called a heathen. But here the poet William Cowper seems to be a heathen rather than a Christian. And also We see the treasures in the mines in the depth of this earth, and those treasures are preserved by the Creator, and that Creator Himself is the God. And in the form of such treasures, the God is there in the depth of the earth. So it is another form. And then He is in the form of the law of nature. He is in the form of the law of nature. How He is in the form of the law of nature? Everything that happens in the nature according to His order, according to His rule. Nothing will happen beyond that rule, beyond His order. And unless that order is passed by the God, nothing happens, nothing moves, nothing is possible. It is another form. Then the raining clouds are also the embodiment of God, according to the poet. Those clouds are made to move and they are made to clash among themselves. As the result, they will create thunder and lightning. They will create thunder. They will create the horrible sound. They will create thunder. And immediately after that horrible sound, they will rain. They will send the downpour over our head, which is the source of life, which is very essential to renew our life. And that is the source of energy. Water is a source of energy. It means even in the form of clouds, we see that God, because those clouds will be created somewhere, and with the help of the storm, those clouds will travel from one place to another, and wherever it is necessary, wherever the water is necessary, and there the clouds will clash among themselves, and they will pour down the water. They will rain in the form of the blessings of the God over our head, with which we and all the living beings live comfortably, live happily, live with food, live with all the things that we require to lead our life. It is another form. And then it is an unvaluable providence. He should not be judged by a weak or feeble sense, because it is not so easy to understand Him and His providence. He has His own plan. He has His own the design to help this world, living beings. And every living being has to trust Him, because we all live with the grace of that God. We eat because of the God's mercy. We sleep well because of God's mercy. We get the sunlight because of God's mercy. We get air because of God's mercy. And that's why we have to be very, very loyal to that God and God's will and God's power and law of nature. And even the time, it is the greatest force. Okay, even the time, it is the greatest force. Even that time is also nothing but God Himself. So in the form of time also, we can observe this God as it is presented by the poet in this poem. Time is the greatest force. How it carries the whole universe on its shoulder with change that happens at every moment, at every second, every bit of a second. And He Himself charges the fuel to the time to move stoplessly, to move without stopping anywhere. Do you remember in the past history of the thousands of the years of its Earth's life? Was there any example that the time stopped sometimes? No. If the time stopped, everything remains still, means everything remains lifeless. And it is all full of life because of the grace of the God, that as long as there is a grace of the God, so long the time moves. As long as the time moves, so long this world lives. So long the living beings in this world live happily. And the whole nature, including the large, the big tree to a small plant to a blade of grass. The whole nature is also the God. In the form of the whole nature also we see the God in this poem. Because that nature produces buds, flowers, nuts and fruits for who? Is it for the God himself? No, this nature produces all eatable things to the living beings. And that's why in the form of nature also we can see the God. And then we can see whatever, everything is God. When we discussed all these forms of God, then we can understand whatever we see around us, in everything there is God. So these are the different forms that are taken as the images in this poem to show how God is there in various forms of the nature. Now let us discuss the next concept, that is how that God has his relationship with all the living beings in this world. How that God has his relationship with all the living beings in this world. See, the God has been an indispensable and filial relationship. He has an indispensable and filial relationship with all the living beings. Filial relationship means the mother and the child has filial relationship, and that filial relationship will understand everything in both mother and the child. Like that, the God and this world has the filial relationship, and the indispensable relationship is there between the God and the world of these living beings. Because this creation is there because of its creator, and that creator, while creating this creation, had a plan. According to his plan, everything is moving on in favor of the living beings. But that happens and that moves, that runs in favor of these living beings so long as the living beings obey the law of nature or the sovereign will of God. Otherwise, that sovereign will of God takes revenge against the living beings. Or if the living beings go against the law of nature, and that nature itself will take a revenge against us. For example, you just see what all things have been happening nowadays in the modern world due to our assault on the nature. The new diseases like corona comes and attacks us, and flood happens that nobody can stop it, and all that causes the great loss, unsavable loss it causes. And this is all because of God's anger. And why he becomes angry? He becomes angry when we, the living beings, go against his sovereign will, go against the law of nature. And this is how the relationship is between that God or the Creator and these living beings. Let us see that nature has its own process of running the life of the creation, taking the life of the creation forward. That time carries this whole creation over its shoulder with all the changes that happen at every second, at every bit of a second. How? This nature has to renew its life every now and then, every year. So all the living beings should live amidst the nature. For that, the Creator creates the clouds somewhere and he brings them all over. He scatters them all over the creation with the help of the storm. And those will clash among themselves, and thunder and lightning that will happen, and they will send the rain in the form of the blessings of God. And why all this happens? Why that clouds travel from one place to some other place? And why these clouds will clash and bring the downpour? They will bring the rain to us. It is because it is already planned. It all happens according to the plan of the Creator, and according to that plan, the Creator sends those clouds, and the Creator himself makes those clouds to clash and create thunder and lightning, and as a result, the rain, and the rain will be the source of life for all the living beings in this world. And then this Creator has kept the treasures unmeasurable, unvaluable. Means we cannot measure the value. That much of treasures he has kept in the unfathomable depth of the earth. He has anger. He has kept that unfathomable, unmeasurable treasure in the depth unfathomable in the earth. Why? With what purpose? It is for the purpose of protecting we, the living beings, protecting us, the living beings. And he becomes angry, but at the same time he pours. He becomes angry, but he pours his mercy in so many forms. And whenever that living being needs his mercy, he comes forward and pours his mercy upon us. He produced everything for all living beings to live comfortably. He produces everything in the nature for the living beings. Only when that God produces all the things in the nature, then only we can live with the help of him. All pains are necessary. He gives some pain to every living being. See, everybody's life cannot be fully happy. Everybody's life cannot be filled with joy, only joy. If it is so, then it would be meaningless. If joy has to be desirable, there must be some pain, there must be some sorrow, there must be some sadness. Then only joy will become important. Otherwise, that joy does have no meaning at all. But the force of time heals that pain. See, it's very inevitable for every living being to undergo a pain, but that force of time itself heals it up. And that is also intended by the Creator, by the God, and that we have to undergo. It is compulsory. We have to undergo. If there is pain for me, it is because the gain is waiting for me. If there is pain for me, it is because the gain is waiting for me. That's why without pain, the gain will never be meaningful. And whatever he creates and however he acts, he does all for his creation and for the living beings. They are living in his creation. And we are the part of that creation, and that is why we are nothing if we don't have any relationship with the Creator or the God. In this way, every living being, either it is man or an insect or an animal or a bird or a plant or a grass, everything that lives and grows in this world has, in one or the other way, an indispensable relationship with the God. Then let us move on to the third concept. The third concept is, what is the similarity between the Indian concept of God and William Cowper's concept of God? As we read this poem, as we completed this poem, we have to come out with the idea of God according to William Cowper. How it is similar to the idea of God according to Indian religious practices. Let's see. We in India have our own religious practices. We believe that God as three forces. The God, we believe this God, we find this God as three forces. One is creator, another is protector, and the third one is destroyer. See, creator, ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಲಯ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಪರಿಕಲ್ಪನೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಆಚರಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ, ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ನಂಬಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ. ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ, ಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಲಯ. ಈ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್ನು, ಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಕಾಪಾಡೋದು, ಲಯ ನಾಶ ಮಾಡೋದು. ಏನಿದು ನಾಶ ಮಾಡೋದು ಅಂದರೆ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಯಾದದ್ದೆಲ್ಲದು ಶಾಶ್ವತವಾಗಿರೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಶಾಶ್ವತವಾಗಿರ್ತೈತಿ. ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಯ ಒಳಗಿರುವ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಯಾದ ವಸ್ತುಗಳು ತಮ್ಮ ತಮ್ಮ ಆಯುಷ್ಯ ಮುಗಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಎಂಡ್ ಆಗಲೇಬೇಕು. ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ, ವಿಷ್ಣು, ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಅಂತ ಮೂರು ಶಕ್ತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಗುರುತಿಸ್ತೀವಿ. ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ, ವಿಷ್ಣು ಕಾಪಾಡ್ತಾನೆ, ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಅದನ್ನು ಎಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಒನ್ಸ್ ವಿ ಗೆಟ್ ಬರ್ತ್ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಡೈ, ರೀಚ್ ಅನ್ ಎಂಡ್. ಹಾಗೆ ಯಾವುದು ಒಂದು ಅಸ್ತಿತ್ವ ಪಡಿತದೋ ಅದು ತನ್ನ ಅಂತ್ಯಕಾಲವನ್ನು, ಅಳಿವನ್ನು ಮುಟ್ಟಲೇಬೇಕಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಈ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ಸು ಈ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಯ ಒಳಗಡೆ, ಈ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್ನಿನ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ವೇ ಆಫ್ ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ ಬಿಲೀಫ್, ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ವೇ ಆಫ್ ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಒಪ್ಪಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ನಂಬಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಗಾಡ್ ಈಸ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಹೆಂಗೆ ನಾವು ದೇವ್ರನ್ನ ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ರೂಪದಾಗ ನಂಬ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ. ಗಾಡ್ ಈಸ್ ದಿ ಎಂಬಾಡಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಲ್ ನಾಲೆಡ್ಜ್, ಆಲ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಂತ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಆಲ್ entities, all things. So we call him with three words: omnipresent, omnipotent and omniscient. ನೋಡಿ, ನಾವು ದೇವ್ರನ್ನ ಯಾವ ಥರ ನಂಬಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ದೇವ್ರನ್ನ ಯಾವ ರೂಪದಾಗ ನಾವು ಕಾಣ್ತೀವಿ, ದೇವ್ರನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೆಸೆನ್ಸ್ನ ಅಥವಾ ದೇವರ ಒಂದು ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟನ್ನ ನಾವು ಯಾವ ಥರ ಅರ್ಥೈಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ದೇವರು ಸರ್ವಾಂತರ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂತ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಬಿಲೀವ್ಡ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ಹೀ ಈಸ್ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಎವ್ರಿವೇರ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಸೇಮ್ ಟೈಮ್. At the same time, He is there in the river, He is there in the sea, He is there in my soul, He is there in my son's soul, He is there in my house, in there in my all members of the family. See, He is everywhere at the same time. Such is the God's existence. Such is the God's existence. ಸರ್ವಾಂತರ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅವನು ಅಂದರೆ ಏಕಕಾಲಕ್ಕೆ ಅವನು ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ಇರಬಲ್ಲ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಈಸ್ ಓಮ್ನಿ ಪೊಟೆಂಟ್. ಪೊಟೆನ್ಷಿಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಮೀನ್ಸ್ he has the power to do anything. He has all the power to do anything in the world. Nothing else is greater power than God Himself. ಅವನು ಸರ್ವಶಕ್ತ. ಎಷ್ಟು ಸರ್ವಶಕ್ತ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಶಕ್ತಿ ಇನ್ಯಾರಿಗೂ ಇರೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅವನು ಏನು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಮಾಡಬಲ್ಲ. ಅವನ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗದೇ ಇರೋವಂಥದ್ದು ಏನೂ ಕೂಡ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅಂಥ ಸರ್ವಶಕ್ತ ಅವನು, ಏನು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಮಾಡಬಲ್ಲ. ದೆನ್ he is omniscient, means he knows everything. He knows everything. What happens second after and what is going to happen an hour after or a day after, a week later or a year later, what happens, everything he knows. And at the same time, where what is happening and what is going to happen and all that he knows. He is knowing everything. He is the boss of all knowledge. ಅವನು ಸರ್ವಜ್ಞಾನಿ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ನಂಬ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ he is everywhere in everything. He is unbeaten power and he knows everything. The same belief we find in William Cowper's concept of God in this poem. ಸೊ ಇದೇ ಪೊಯಮ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ನಂಬ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಈ ದೇವರು ಅಂತ ಹಿಂಗೆ ಅಂತ, ಅದನ್ನು ಈ ಪೊಯಮಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಲಿಯಂ ಕಾಪರ್ನ ಒಂದು ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ನಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಕಾಣ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ. ಹೆಂಗೆ? ಕಾಪರ್ ಸೇಸ್ ದಟ್ ದ ಗಾಡ್ ಈಸ್ in mines, clouds, treasure, time, plant, water, etc. See, this poet William Cowper writes this poem, indirectly tells us that this God is present in all these things. Things like in the mines, in the depth of the earth, in the clouds, in the treasure that is preserved in the mines, in the time, in the plant, in the water, in the air, in the plants, in the grass, in everything. He is present. So, it shows that William Cowper also believes that the God is omnipresent. So, ಒಂದು ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಏನಂತ ನಂಬ್ತಾರೆ, ದೇವರು ಸರ್ವಾಂತರ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಹತ್ರ ಏಕಕಾಲಕ್ಕೆ ಇರ್ತಾನೆ ಇವನು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ನಂಬ್ತೀವಿ. ಅದನ್ನು ವಿಲಿಯಂ ಕಾಪರು ಕೂಡ ನಂಬ್ತಾನೆ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯ್ತು. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಅವನೇ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ, ಏನಂತಾನೆ, ಸರ್ಫೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ ವಾಟರಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಇವನು ನಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾನೆ, ಗಾಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇವನಿರ್ತಾನೆ, ಮೈನ್ಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇವನಿರ್ತಾನೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುವ ಸಂಪತ್ತು ಏನೈತಲ್ಲ ಅದರಾಗ ಇವನದಾನೆ, ಅವನದೇ ಅದು, ಅವನು ಇಟ್ಟಿರೋದೇ ಅದು. ಮತ್ತು ಗಾಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇವನಿದ್ದಾನೆ, ಟೈಮ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಐತಲ್ಲ ಅದು ಅವನೇನೆ, ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಟ್ ಈ ಭೂಮಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಹುಟ್ಟಿರೋ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಸಸ್ಯವರ್ಗ, ಈ ಪ್ರಕೃತಿ ಎಲ್ಲವೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವನೆಲ್ಲದರಾಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಅದಾನೆ ಅಂತ ಇವನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ. ಅಂದಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಗಾಡ್ ಏನು ಸರ್ವಾಂತರ್ಯಾಮಿ ದೇವರು, ಗಾಡ್ ಈಸ್ ಓಮ್ನಿ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಐತಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ there in this poem that is written by William Cowper. Then Cowper says the next concept, let us see. Then Cowper says that the God's will is sovereign. He says God's will is sovereign, means nobody can challenge him, nobody can question him. To such an extent he is so powerful, if anybody challenges and questions, he will surely beats him to an end. It is impossible to question his unsovereign will. He is supreme, means He is the most powerful of all powers. He is most powerful of all the living beings. And that's why He is omnipotent. He believes that He is omnipotent. It means everything happens according to His will. See, even that storm flows, the wind blows, because it is the order of the God. Grass grows because it is the sovereign will of the God. I am speaking to you because it is the sovereign will of the God. It is the order of the God. It is the permission. I am permitted by the God. That's why I am speaking. If the rain rains, it is because of the order of the God. See, the tree grows because it is the order of the God. We do get oxygen in this atmosphere because it is the will of the God. See, everything that happens, we get sunlight here because it is the order of the God. So everything happens according to unsovereign will of the God, according to the law of nature, according to the law of nature. So, He is omnipotent. When this poet tells like this, there is no question that William Cowper accepts that God is omnipotent. Cowper says, God is His own interpreter. God is His own interpreter. Means He knows everything. Nobody else can interpret Him. Only He can interpret Himself. Means what we all know, He knows more than that. What we, crores of people, know, He knows more than all of us. He knows everything, every bit of an atom, every bit of an atom He knows in this existence of the world, in the existence of the universe. And that's why He is omniscient. He is omniscient, and that is why He advises, don't be atheists. Please be theists. Don't be atheists, but be theists. ನೀವು ನಾಸ್ತಿಕರಾಗಬೇಡಿ, ಆಸ್ತಿಕರಾಗಿ. ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಬ್ಲೈಂಡ್ ಆಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲದನ್ನ ದೇವರು ಅಂತ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಡ್ರಿ. ನೀವು ಹಂಗೆ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ, ಅಥವಾ ಅವ್ನು ಹುಡ್ಕಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ಅವ್ನು ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ಅವ್ನು ಎಕ್ಸಾಮಿನ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ಅವ್ನು ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ನೀವು ಯಾವುದೇ ಸಾರ್ಥಕ್ಯವನ್ನು ಪಡೆಯೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ನೀವು ಫೇಲ್ ಆಗ್ತೀರಿ. ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಇನ್ ವೇನ್. ನೀವು ನಿರರ್ಥಕ ಅದು. ನೀವೇನಾರ ಹಾಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲದನ್ನ ದೇವರು, ಎಲ್ಲದನ್ನ ಅವನು ತೋರಿಸ್ಲಿ ನೋಡೋಣ, ಅವನು ನನಗೆ ಕಾಣಲಿ ನೋಡೋಣ ಅವನು ಅಂತ ನೀವೇನಾರ ಹುಡ್ಕಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ನೀವೇನಾರ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ನೀವೇನಾರ ಅವನ್ನ ಪರೀಕ್ಷೆ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ, ಇದು ನಿರರ್ಥಕ. ಇಟ್ ಆಲ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಇನ್ ವೇನ್. ಇದು ಅರ್ಥಹೀನ, ನಿರರ್ಥಕ. ಅದರಿಂದ ನಿಮಗೇನು ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವನು omniscient ಕೂಡ. ಸೊ he also accepts that God is omnipresent, omnipotent and omniscient. In this way, this poem presents this concept of God, and that concept of God is similar to the concept of God in Indian theological belief. With this much we can end up our analysis or critical appreciation of the poem. Then in just few minutes, you see, to annotate the lines, you have to do these things. To annotate the lines in the examination, you have to identify the poem and the poet, and you have to contextualize the lines. Means in what context he tells these lines and what is the meaning of those lines. Analyze the meaning of the lines and connect their contribution to the theme of the poem. Means how that meaning is connected with the total theme of the poem. That you have to write. and identify the voice of the lines, means who actually speaks and to whom actually these lines are spoken, and that is also expected. But how much you have to write? You should write not less than half a page. See, your annotation should be more than half a page or less than one page. That will be sufficient. I think this much of discussion upon this poem seems to be sufficient from the examination point of view, as well for good knowledge of this poem. I presented to you people sufficiently. With this much, I put an end to my presentation. Thank you.